I'm Bokerah Brumley, and this is the story behind my story.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Blind, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Bokerah Brumley.
I'd like to thank some sponsors who, due to their generous support of the show, help bring this to you each and every time we bring you the show. From Eamon Ambrose, author of the best-selling sci-fi serial 0 Hour, comes a new novelette, Love and Other Algorithms. When Frank, a personal robot assistant, meets a similar model named Shelley, they are inexplicably linked and form an instant bond. But when outside forces conspire to separate them, Frank must decide how far he will go to save their relationship. However, all is not as it seems, and as Frank searches for Shelley, he learns that they are both part of something much, much bigger. Out now from Amazon, Love and Other Algorithms by Eamon Ambrose. Hey authors, are you looking for a beautiful professional cover for your science fiction or fantasy book? Holly Heisey Designs offers custom illustration and cover design with characters that will put your people center stage, spaceships designed from the ground up, and scenery that makes your world come alive. Visit Holly Heisey Design to book a custom cover or view pre-made ebook covers ready to purchase. Holly is an award-winning illustrator and designer who's done work for the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, the Future Chronicles anthology series, and USA Today and Amazon.com best-selling authors. Holly will bring your story world to life and get you a cover that will help sell your book. Visit hollyheiseydesign.com for more information on how to book your custom cover design or purchase pre-mades, as well as join the Holly Heisey Design Facebook group for discounts and first dibs at all the new spaceship and fantasy pre-made covers. Find all of this at hollyheiseydesign.com. A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson, a military sci-fi political thriller set just a short decade from now in 2031, holding to the concept of individual liberty can get you killed. Western civilization is in collapse, a process led and driven by the world's leading supposed democracies, our own included. What was once the Western world's guiding light of liberty is quickly being replaced by state-sponsored serfdom under the guise of a global economic reset done in the name of the workers. This is an exciting new novel by an exciting new talent, a debut novel, the first in a series from a former CIA operations officer who has decided that his lifelong writing habit, hobby, obsession is more fun than real work. Go pick up a copy today of A Bright Shore, The Eden Chronicles, Book 1 by S.M. Anderson. There's a link to all of our great sponsors in the show notes at hankgarner.com. Stick around at the end of our excellent interview today for an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. As always, thanks for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm really excited to have my friend Bokerah Brumley on the show with me. Bokerah is an excellent science fiction and fantasy writer, and she writes YA fiction and all sorts of stuff. She works all over publishing, and I was really excited when she agreed to come on the show with me today. I think we're going to have a great time. Welcome to the show, Bokerah.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. Should be a lot of fun.
I think so. Well, you are familiar with the show, and you know that we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
My first memory, I had just learned how to write, and I wrote a poem for my mom. We were camping, and it was Mother's Day or what it was exactly, but I wrote her a poem. And then I think pretty much from then on, I was probably 7 or so, from then on I wrote horrible poetry. And then I figured out that storytelling actually, people identify with storytelling in a way that is just amazing, and I really like that. So it's been 4 weeks, but hopefully I'm making strides in fixing it. So.
It's really funny. A lot of people start writing poetry, and most poetry is horrible until it's not. And it's this weird thing. I think you're either a poet or you're not. There's, I don't know. I don't know if it's one of those things you can practice and get better at. Or maybe we just give up. Maybe we just give up.
I think that's probably to make sentences that was to make stanzas.
Right.
So I went sentences.
Exactly. And so where did you grow up?
I grew up in northeast Oklahoma, near Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Okay.
And we've camped and lived all around there. So all the little towns like Cleveland, Claremore. There's a ton of little towns over there, all around up there. So that's where I'm originally from.
Gotcha. You write a lot of genre fiction, sci-fi, and fantasy. What was your first experience with those genres?
With those genres?
Yeah, but did you love reading those as a kid?
No, I was a writer on Star Trek. I was like 10, I think, or 11. I don't know. It was the best thing in the world. My mom watched the latest installment of Star Trek, and I got to stay up late and watch it with her. So that was my first experience with the genre, and I started writing. It didn't dawn on me that I write until probably, 2015. So that's when I went, bailed off into it. It's like, this is my favorite everything. I love science fiction. I love fantasy. I love world building, just create civilizations with words. It's just amazing. So I think that was probably my first interaction with the genre itself. I started reading it probably when I was 12 or so, and through my teen years. So,
what was your entry point to reading sci-fi and fantasy? Was there a particular series?
I don't know that there was a particular series that I really was attached to until I got to the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan. That was incredible. And I don't know if it was just because I was connecting two different sides of me, like my reading side and my, actual creating side. But that just impacted me in a different way because his world being is amazing and just it was incredible. I mean, that I think probably stands out to me more as a writer, that particular series. But I read the little paperbacks, the Star Trek paperbacks, and the Star Wars paperbacks, and all those, anything I can find, and whether it's from Goodwill or a used bookstore, whatever I could get is what I read. But I think as a writer, the very first one that really just, hey, this is what I want to do. This probably the Wheel of Time series.
Do you remember how many books in the Wheel of Time were out when you started getting into it?
I think 2 or 3 or 4 maybe. There wasn't very many. I think. So it's all I could find was those first few.
Right. Do you think the promise of a long series, did that appeal to you? I know a lot of readers when they want to get in, especially a fantasy world where you can just completely immerse yourselves. When you know that it's going to be a long series, there's more allure to that because nothing's worse than getting to the end of a book and feeling like you have to leave the characters and you're almost kind of heartbroken, that you have to leave that world. But with the promise of a dozen books in the series, that's pretty appealing to a lot of readers.
I think so. I think there's a certain amount of, one of the things that I think people like to read epic fantasy and like to read science fiction because they like to be immersed in that world. But because they like series, because, you're escaping, and you want to escape, but you want to escape into something familiar. It's like a strange back and forth. But, escaping to something that's familiar is what I think so many readers like, and they become friends with they feel like they're friends with the characters. They feel like they're going on the adventure, and we all we all, cheer for Samwise. We all feel for Frodo. I mean, this is all connected. You want to live in that world because you're escaping from whatever it is, whether it's the drudgery or work or anything like that. You're escaping from where you are, and then a series promises that you'll escape to somewhere new but familiar by the time you get to book 3 or 4. So that's why I think series are so popular.
Is there anything that you think you've taken away from Robert Jordan? Maybe something you've learned from him and his writing, or spending the time in the Wheel of Time like you did? Do you think that impacted you as a writer in any way?
I do. I think that for a long time it made my descriptions too long. And it made clear, I'm like, by book 7 or 8, I knew I couldn't write military fiction. Like, that was just not, I think those are the 2 things I took away. It took me a while to, like, figure out not to spend so much time describing. But on the plus side, the relationships that people make and how, people don't expect characters to be different than people and not have problems and not have, like, real relationships or arguments or disagreements or anything like that. And I think that's probably on the plus side, just the real family relationships, the real friendships, the real marriages, all of that included in there. And that's the part that I really enjoyed and that really impacted me, because that's something that and of course, that tends to be what I don't write military fiction, science fiction, I don't write either way. But I do write a lot about families and about friendships and brothers and, coming to help your family, and adoption has been in some of my stories. I mean, there's just a ton of that, taking in a new family and having a family and all, that was incredible to me, especially the way that Robert Jordan didn't necessarily adhere to convention in some ways. And that was okay, because that was the world and he did it well.
So at what point did you know that you wanted to be a writer, other than your foray into poetry, and then your love of reading sci-fi and fantasy? At what point did you say that you wanted to try your hand at it?
I always have written, but I think I really wanted to try probably when I was 12 or 13. And I was at my grandma's, and she always had these Christian romances. Like, that is, like, what I read, because I would go and spend weeks at her house, and that's what she had. She had the Reader's Digest collections, and she had Christian romances. That's what she had. So that's
my grandmother had stacks of those as well.
Yeah, that's most of what I read during that time. And I sat down one day with her, and we were talking about a book that she loved, that she passed to me, and we talked about it. She didn't have a TV. She was in the mountains in Oklahoma, so she had no reception or anything like that. So that's all we did. And so we were talking about it, and I said, I think I could do that. I think I could. First person ever to say, you can totally do that. You can. So from then on, like 18, she was my biggest cheerleader. And always writing things in there. It's great. It's not like she was an editor. She wouldn't have known how to encourage me to be a better writer, but she was always encouraging, and she always believed that I could. And that, I think, impacted me more than anything, because I had to learn a lot, but I had to get to the place where I could learn what I didn't know. And I never would have gotten to that point if she hadn't been there cheering me on. Unfortunately, she passed away before I could publish a book, but I would have never gotten to that point without her.
I'll tell you what, I think that's more important, especially for a young writer's journey, is that believing that you can do it. There will be plenty of editors that come along to help you shape your writing up. But if you don't have that person that just gives you unbridled encouragement, then you may never step out to do it. And I think that early encouragement is so crucial, so crucial. So what was the first thing that you wrote and published?
The first thing that I wrote and published was Woe for a Fairy, and it's available, but it's not. But I'm probably going to rewrite it and relaunch it in the probably fall or the winter. So that was the first thing that was the first thing that I wrote and published, and I got plugged into an indie group that was publishing. They were publishing anthologies. They were publishing collections. And it was the first thing. I tend to be a short writer. I write a lot of short fiction. So that was like one of the stepping stones. It's a novella. It's a two-part. It's long enough, but it's written in 2 novellas. And I was able to write that and like start working up toward being able to tell a longer story. So that was sort of like bridge between short fiction and long fiction. So that was the first thing.
I think that's a great place to start. And, Ray Bradbury, one of my all-time favorite writers, and I've been going back and reading a lot of his stuff lately, just trying to connect with his creative process. And he talks about how utterly important it is to write short fiction and to get good at it. And the feeling that you can write something short, get to the end of it, have that feeling of accomplishment and then do it again and do it again. And, he talks about writing a short story a week for a year and then dares people to not write something good, in the midst of it. That's pretty ambitious. But I do believe that if you're first starting in publishing shorter fiction, there's nothing that can compare to it. You can get to the end of something. You can learn how to encapsulate a story, get a storyline finished, and I think it's really underrated. I
agree, and it's certainly one of the things that I really enjoy, especially during my 20s. I had a really hard time keeping it long enough to learn how to write a novel. So we had 5 kids in that 10 years between 19 and I think 29. So we always had something going with kids in diapers or whatever, and short fiction was the only way I could write. It was the only way that I could get stories down and start learning what an arc looks like. What does the beginning look like? What does an end look like? What does the middle look like? How do you keep the middle from being boring? And getting that down in short fiction is a fantastic way, because it's just it's more complicated, but you still have to know what a beginning looks like, what a middle looks like, and what an end looks like. And beyond that, those word counts, if you have a maximum word count, that really teaches you which words are essential and which words aren't. And that's important too, because you don't want to just be wandering around in a novel and lose either the editor's attention or the agent's attention or whatever route you're going. The same thing applies. If it's not attention grabbing from the beginning, then it's not going to be interesting to the reader either. And short fiction does a fantastic job of teaching how to be very careful with the words you choose. So I really enjoy flash fiction for the same reason, because you really get down to, if your word limit is 1,000 words and you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, it really teaches you how to trim and how to self-edit and how to make every word count.
Yeah. And teach you how to get down to the heart of the matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it teaches you how to identify. Sorry.
No, yeah, you're right. What did you do after that first story was, or those first couple that then equaled a novel? Where did you move on to from that?
I wrote the second novel in that series, and then I wrote another novel that has just been kind of sitting in my hard drive called Four Winds from a Tempest, and it's a science fiction, it's a space opera. And then Leviathan's Rise was the follow-up to Woe for a Fairy, and it's an urban fantasy / paranormal romance. I mean, it's more paranormal romance than Bokerah Brumley is, but And then I guess after that, I got on a short story writing spree, and I'm in a bunch of different anthologies. And I wrote Imani Earns Her Cape. I entered it in Pitch Slam, which is a Twitter pitch competition, and I was selected for Pitch Slam with that one. And that gave me a little bit more confidence to start submitting it. And Clean Reads Press picked Imani up. And I guess and I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff I've written, a bunch of novellas, a bunch of short stories, all for anthologies mostly. So just practicing.
Right. Practice. Tell us about Imani. Imani Earns Her Cape. When this episode airs, it will be available. It's up for pre-order right now as we're talking. Mm-hmm. But tell us the story. And by the way, that cover is gorgeous.
I love it.
I know. Where did the idea for the story come from?
So, I'm not really... I sat down and I tried to figure out, and I tried to go at it. So I generally write more YA, and YA has a lot of competition, and it sounds, I don't know, it's just like, I actually went at it from a logical standpoint instead, and basically said to myself, if I want to stand out in a crowd, the crowd has to be smaller because I'm not good enough to stand out in a big crowd yet. So, middle grade fiction has because it's a harder sell, it has fewer people writing in it. So I wanted to be able to get in front of people who could give me pointers and advice and feedback. And I write short anyway. So middle grade fiction was kind of the perfect, I write clean and I write short. Not clean as in without errors, but clean as in there's not graphic content. So it was just kind of a happy place for me to get my foot in the door because there weren't as many competitors in Pitch Slam that were writing middle grade, but I was still able to benefit from feedback because there were fewer competitors. So I sat down and I looked at the market. I looked at what readers want in fantasy, and they want to be immersed in a new world. And middle grade, I looked at the age that middle grade was and how it suited my strengths, writing shorter and writing clean. And so then I just sat down and came up with a plot that I felt like would made me laugh. So it made me excited to write it. And that's basically how Imani came about. It was less like I wasn't just standing around and had an inspiration. I actually tried, because in the world of publishing, feedback is incredible. Everybody needs feedback. So that's how I went out to get that. And with that feedback, I was able to get a publishing deal with Clean Reads Press. So that was how Imani came around. And the story starts in Virginia. She lives, and she's excited because she's going to go to a Comic-Con, and she's designing her outfit. She's designing her costume. And she's super excited because she's going to meet Michelle Nichols, and she's designing a costume that's sort of like Wonder Woman, and she's drawing it, and she's basically a Fae in the DC area, but she's incognito because her mom is an ambassador to the president from the Fae Realm. So she doesn't get to be who she is, and the only place that she can be is if she goes to Comic-Con, because then people love her ears, and her mom is okay with her showing her ear points because, it's Comic-Con. People are constantly, so people think her, she even has this conversation at some point in the book. I don't remember if it's the beginning or the end or if I moved it, but how people ooh and ah over how real her ears are because she's Fae, and she just feels comfortable there because she can be herself there more than she can be herself anywhere else in Virginia. So anyway, so that's the starting point. So
that is a genius premise.
Hopefully,
I love that so much.
I
I love that so much. Where when you start developing characters, and you've got the character of Imani, where do you start with? Do they just show up, and they are who they are, or do you start thinking about, okay, if I have a situation and I need a character for that, I need her to look like this, I need her to act like this, I need her to be from this sort of family. Kind of what's your character building process like?
Character. So generally for character building, sometimes, a character will just pop into my head and I'll know exactly, well, in order to make the worst thing in the world happen to this character, then I have to do this, and then that makes the story. I mean, that's, if this person loves their kids, the best thing I can do to make the story really, interesting is to somebody to kidnap their kids. I mean, sometimes it works that way. With Imani, it was a little bit different because, but not exactly. I needed to send her to the Fae Realm because fantasy readers like to be immersed in a new world. So I knew that I had to get her out of Virginia and send her to the Fae world. And so I knew who she was in Virginia, but it took probably 20,000 words and just writing the story to figure out how it was going to go and figure out who she was and what exactly mattered to her. Like for her mom is a single mom, so her mom is, one of the most important things in the world. And that because of that, there were some parts that I added into the beginning, because if her mom is the most important thing in her world, I really wanted her to look up to her mom and respect her mom. And I've got some scenes where her mom reaches out to a homeless guy in the park and basically tells him to go, to find his family. And anyway, it's a scene that I really let her mom be the star of, but just because, her mom is the star for Imani. And I don't think I figured that out till probably halfway through the book. And then you have to go back and fix everything at the beginning so that it leads to that. But a lot of times it's discovery for me that I learn what is actually important to a character as I go. I don't think it's rare when a character just walks in just as they are. It just walks into my brain just as they are. So.
Right. One thing I love about your writing is that even though you write clean, clean does not mean without hardship. It does not mean without controversy. It doesn't mean that these are Pollyanna-ish characters. These are real characters going through real stuff. Is that important to you to tell the story of the characters faithfully, but not just and not avoid the difficult topics just because you're not dropping F-bombs everywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it is hard. Like for instance, I've been co-writing a gothic romance with a friend of mine, and one of the main character, the hero, he's ex-military. So to be true to his character, that means he curses. That's just who he is. It's just there's certain vernacular that he's going to use, and his character is going to seem flat if we don't stay true to that. And that was a conversation that we had, my co-author and I, before we started. Like, these are the people that we want to work with. Can we do it? And while I write clean, that's generally what I do. It's really important to me to be true to the characters first and foremost. So if I don't know, hardships are important. You can't have a story without some kind of difficulty. Like, you have to have something to get past. But two, just because someone doesn't curse, like Imani she doesn't drop F-bombs. But that's just her. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not I think an F-bomb is bad. It's just not her. And I think probably my decision to write clean has more to do with my kids. Because when I started writing Imani was like, a little while ago when they were younger, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, what if they read this and they're appalled or something? I think I've gotten over that at this point, but it did kind of govern it a little bit. But hardship is hardship, and how a character deals with something is just how a character deals with something. I read all over the place. I read extremely graphic stuff. I read, it doesn't, I'm not, it's not an offense. I'm not offended by that at all. I love characters that are who they are. And I think that's true of people too. I love people who are exactly who they are. And I value that so much. And that extends to fiction too. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, yeah.
All over the place there, but.
No, that's I like your answer. I went through a similar thing where the first book I wrote, Bloom, I was writing it and didn't, it's before I knew anything about publishing or anything. I just had the story I wanted to tell, and my wife and I talked through the story the entire time, and I would read passages of it to my whole family just around the living room. And they thought it was, fascinating to kind of watch this thing take shape. And I read the entire book out loud to them as, kind of editing as I went and seeing if things worked when you spoke it out loud and things like that. But then when I wrote some other books and I had some more intricate characters, I really wrestled with, do I make them talk the way they would talk in the real world? Can I read this out loud to my family again? And that was something I really kind of weighed and struggled with. And in the end, I think you have to be true to the characters, but you don't necessarily have to go straight to the gutter. I think there are things you can do, there are tricks you can use to be true while staying, true to who you are as a writer as well. It's not easy, but you can do it if you're willing to wrestle with it.
Right. I agree, for sure.
Yeah. So, Imani comes out, when people hear this, it's going to be out. Why do you love writing middle grade or YA?
It does come down to, I want to write something that my kids would like to read. Now, that's kind of like, they're not going to, like, you can't expect your fans to be your family. It's just not, it doesn't quite work that way. So it's not that I think that they will really enjoy it. It's just I usually write with them in mind, and that's the ages of my kids right now. So I have a 6-year-old and my oldest is 16. So that's middle grade and YA. So that's the general reason why I write that right now. But I do have some adult titles out, or will have. I have a cyberpunk series with Liberty Island Media that's written for adults, and then I'll have Scatter My Ashes with my co-writer. That's an adult paranormal romance. And so it's not that I don't write adult, it's just I don't know, it makes me excited if I think about, ooh, my kid would love this. And so there's like jokes that nobody gets, but my kids will get if they ever pick up my book, Right. I don't ask them to do that, but, stuff like that. Or like sometimes combinations on locks are their birthdays, and the only way that they'll only know it's in there if they read the book. So there's stuff like that I do that just makes me giggle. So, and it has and I don't whether they read them or not. I would like them to, but it's not that important. Like my oldest son, he loves westerns. He loves Louis L'Amour. And I don't write westerns. He's not going to pick up my book and he would read it if he loved me, but he didn't, it wouldn't, he might just not be the star.
Right. You also work with some publishers and writers. What is the other hat that you wear in publishing?
I wear a bunch of different hats. So the Crossover Alliance, I am an acquisitions editor, so I read work and decide what needs work in the work, or just how close it is and how ready it is for publication for them. And they're kind of they're an interesting company, and I really like their not their model so much, but they're a Christian publisher of fiction, but they're the stories that are like their true characters. So if there are epilogues or there are, because that's the character, they don't shy away from that. It's a niche market that I support that. Your characters need to be your characters. That's just, that makes the best fiction. So I read for them, and then I also work with Liberty Island Media. They are a New York-based publisher of fiction for the conservative libertarians. It's a little. I'm a marketing associate, so a bunch of different jobs. A novel of Men in the Sea, and it's not political by any means at all. So to say that they publish fiction for certain, I think that they're not in. But it's an incredible book. I'm super excited to be part of that project. That is fantastic. You'll love the cover if you look it up on Amazon. It's fantastic. So I do marketing for them, for their authors, and I figure out for the authors, I help the authors figure out where their market is and how to get to their market. So that's basically what I do for their authors, and then I work a little bit in the production at Liberty Island Media, but not a lot. And then I'll be launching a sweet romance line with Subversive Press, probably in the fall, but that's not in my bio. That's just something that I'm working on. I've got a series in mind that's set in a Texas town. It's called Yearly Texas, and it's just straight. It is what I read growing up with my grandma. It is straight, sweet, clean romance. It's contemporary romance. So, and it would be one of those things that I'd like put in a basket and bring to her and say, look what I did, and just be open because it was, her favorite kind of stuff. Anyway, so, and I guess you probably just, homage to her, but it's not, I generally write science fiction and fantasy, so that's a little bit out of my normal, but, I think that's all.
How do you feel like working with other authors, maybe in marketing or in acquisitions? Do you feel like that has any impact on your creative process? Does it fuel your desire to write more? Does it keep you encouraged? Is it kind of like, when working with other authors, iron sharpens iron and keeps us motivated? Do you feel that way working with others?
So when I'm working on the acquisition side of things, and I'm reading things, and whether or not something is ready for publication, it certainly changed the way that I view a rejection. And if any author can spend some time in the slush pile, they really should, because it really takes the sting out of a rejection. Because sometimes an author says, publishing house, or an agent even, says no, not because your work's not good, not for any other reason than they don't have the network to sell your book. And it's really a favor to you that they're saying no. And that's because if they can't sell your book, the network that they have, then you're just going to be frustrated and so away. And why waste time? I mean, there's a really real big side of the publishing industry that I think the creative side doesn't. They acknowledge it, but it's not like until you spend time in the slush pile, you understand it all. So if he has an opportunity to spend some slush pile as an intern, do it. And you also begin to understand how to open a story with a hook, how to get somebody's attention. Like I wrote a short story for a Pluto anthology recently, and drawing on that, what is the most interesting sentence in a science fiction story with? Well, the chicken has to die. That was the very first sentence. And then, people are like, okay, wait, what? So, it teaches you to think about things like that, because there's a certain amount, not unfortunately, but authors today have to have more tools in their toolkit in being able to make a story. You do have to understand where their story is going to fit in the market, and they do have to be kind of cultivating some of those relationships to help their book be the best that it can be. And so, knowing all of those things, it really does, it does change the way I think about writing. So, like, for instance, Woe for a Fairy has a lot of science fiction. Leviathan's Rise has more science fiction than Woe for a Fairy, but it does sort of straddle this place in the middle that there is science fiction and there's fantasy in it. Well, the science fiction is probably going to irritate the science fiction readers, and the fantasy readers aren't necessarily going to be, like, you can do that for sure, but you have to be cognizant of what your expectations are when you publish a book that straddles genres like that. It can be a bestseller, it can be amazing, but you can't go into it expecting that because it does straddle genres. Rather than multiplying your audience, it generally halves your audience when you straddle genres like that, just in general. And obviously everybody, there's exceptions to the rules, and people build fantastic fan bases. Like Kevin J. Anderson has a huge fan base, and anything he publishes has an X number of sales because of its name, because people expect a good story, because he's just cultivated that. So there is that, but if you're a new author starting out, maybe you want to start with, a straight fantasy if you're submitting to agents versus something that straddles the middle and they're not quite sure where to categorize it. So, and I think that probably impacted my writing and how I pitch things to people quite a bit. Just learning that there's this business side that you do have to be aware of so that you can give your story the best chance possible.
Bokerah, the book Imani Earns Her Cape will be available when this episode airs. I encourage everyone to go pick up a copy of it. Let's help Bokerah have a massive launch for this book. Everybody, I think you're going to love it. I can put you online if they're not familiar with all of your work and want to kind of dig into your back catalog and all that good stuff.
Well, if you search Bokerah on Amazon, my stuff pops up. I'm the only one. You can almost do that with Google, too. If you search Bokerah Brumley, I'm it. So, I think I'm weeding through a bunch of stuff. But on social media, on Instagram, if you like farm pictures, if you follow me on Instagram, you can see my chickens and, my goats and everything else. It's all
adorable
Bokerah.
baby goats.
Yes, I do not put pajamas on them. I get questions regularly about that.
Do you do yoga with them, though?
No. No yoga.
I hear that's a thing. I don't know what that's about, but, crazy things. Goat yoga. Bokerah, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. We're going to send everybody to pick up a copy of Imani Earns Her Cape and to connect with you on social media. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Hank. It was great to be here.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Hedwig slipped into David's den, the circular reading room. A ladder of crude rungs protruded from the wall, remnant of its days as a grain silo. He pulled himself upward, rung by rung, until the bookcases and sofas were far below. Even if he fell and died, he didn't really care anymore. No, he did care. He couldn't die yet. She had to die first. That would make their divorce final, if she wanted it so much. Darkness enveloped him. He reached the top of the ladder and stepped off onto a catwalk of black mesh, lit only by the faint light of the 4 square windows that encircled the turret. From this perch he could see the exit she would use. He felt like an assassin, like Lee Harvey Oswald in the window of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. But he wouldn't use a rifle, no. Rifles leave evidence. Rifles can be produced in court. Rifles can miss. He pulled back a shroud of burlap and opened the cardboard box he'd stashed up here earlier that day. He reached into it and withdrew the only murder weapon, the only magic bullet, a Van Brunt could ever need. The gold lantern flashed in the moonlight. He held it up to the window. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, he thought, and then it's time for a midnight ride. But it won't be Paul Revere. No, not Paul Revere at all. He found the oyster knife at last. He lay his cupped palm sideways over the vent. Don't get blood on your Armani. And stabbed the blade into his palm. The blood came hot. He dripped it into the lantern, where the skull of the horseman waited to sip it like nectar. The reliquary glowed, and an incantation in Old Dutch appeared, shining from within the metal. It was time. Hedwig bent and whispered into the vents. Rise, headless, and ride. The letters vanished, and a cold white light burst from the thing. The skull wasn't just a skull anymore. It had gestated. Capillaries clung to it the way fine hair clings to the crown of a newborn. A thick, carotid artery moved with snake-like undulation, drinking blood from the pool at the base, pulling it upwards to circulate through scarlet vessels, through twisting coils, slurping the liquid greedily, the way little Zeph used to slurp strawberry Nesquik through a crazy straw. The blood pulsed and pushed into the nose, into the eyes, into the hollow cavity within the skull. But was it hollow still? Hedwig didn't think so. He felt a mind growing there, something with a will to challenge his own. He fixed his gaze to the twin caverns of its eye sockets, speaking slowly and deliberately. Jessica Bridge. The death's head grin broadened somehow, and a thread of black and green liquid, shiny as a horsefly's wings, trickled from the gap of a missing eye tooth. Only Jessica Bridge. Do you understand? He shook the lantern. Do you understand? The face lurched forward and struck the glass, leaving a red splash there. It wobbled and settled, smiling and nodding. Jessica Bridge, hissed the face. Yes. Hedwig raised the lantern a little. Jessica Bridge. The red face tipped backwards and the jaw cracked wide. Hedwig recoiled. Something pink and wet writhed inside that mouth. The nub of a new tongue, salivating as if it could taste the name. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge. Jessica Bridge.